Racist cop demands ID from black woman. Her Secret Service badge leaves him speechless. A warm, breezy afternoon in the heart of Washington, D.C. The city bustles with tourists snapping photos of iconic monuments, locals rushing to their next appointments, and the steady hum of traffic weaving through the avenues. Amid this swirl of activity, a single moment shatters the everyday routine, a moment charged with tension and injustice. A police officer, brimming with misplaced authority, targets a black woman minding her own business. What he doesn't realize is that she's no ordinary civilian. She's a proud member of the United States Secret Service, and she's about to turn his entire world upside down. Ebony Harris woke up early that morning, full of energy and optimism. She'd spent the previous night reviewing classified protocols for an upcoming protective detail, a job she took extraordinary pride in. Serving in the United States Secret Service was more than a career for her. It was a calling, a life's work, and a testament to her resilience. She'd trained at the James J. Rowley Training Center in Beltsville, Maryland. Long, grueling days that tested her mental and physical fortitude, and she had excelled at it, graduating near the top of her class. Yet Ebony's journey to the agency had been anything but easy. As a girl growing up in Southeast D.C., she was keenly aware of societal challenges, particularly those involving race and law enforcement. She'd seen friends unfairly targeted, neighbors who distrusted the police, and a local community beset by tension whenever a patrol car crept through the streets. Her own father had been a proud Marine who served overseas, only to return home and find his dedication questioned because of the color of his skin. Stories like his had fueled Ebony's ambition to strive for excellence in a sphere where black voices were still underrepresented. That particular morning, Ebony wore a simple, casual outfit. Dark jeans, a light blazer over a crisp blouse, and sneakers comfortable enough for walking the length of Pennsylvania Avenue. She wasn't on duty. She'd wrapped up an important meeting at Secret Service headquarters on 950 H St. Aw and decided to enjoy a quiet walk back toward the National Mall. As always, she carried her identification and her official badge discreetly tucked away in an interior pocket of her blazer. Whether on duty or off, Ebony never left home without them. The day couldn't have been more inviting. The sun shone brightly, illuminating the domed Capitol building in the distance. Tourists carried maps and cameras, children on field trips laughed and skipped, and buskers sang on street corners hoping to catch a few coins from passers-by. For Ebony, the city felt alive with purpose. The distinct hum of traffic and chatter formed an urban symphony, one she had grown to love even as a child living on the city's outskirts. While Ebony had resolved to spend part of the day off the clock, she couldn't help but remain vigilant. Even out of uniform, she possessed an almost instinctual awareness. Her line of work demanded it. One never knew when a threat might present itself. She frequently scanned the sidewalks, the shops, the streets, an automatic habit. It was second nature by now. As she approached a bustling intersection near the National Archives building, Ebony noticed a police cruiser idling across the street. Nothing unusual there. D.C. Metropolitan Police Department vehicles often patrolled the tourist-heavy areas, but something about this officer's gaze caught her attention. He seemed to be watching her specifically, following her with his eyes. Ebony's training had taught her not to jump to conclusions, but she felt the subtle electricity of suspicion in the air. She pressed the crosswalk button and tried to ignore him. After all, there was no legitimate reason for an officer to single her out. She walked at a steady pace, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood her own worth. Once the light changed, she crossed the intersection. Out of the corner of her eye, she noted the cruiser easing forward, trailing her with a deliberate slowness. A knot formed in her stomach. Ebony turned onto Constitution Avenue, passing a group of street vendors hawking cold drinks and souvenirs. She paused briefly at a kiosk offering fresh fruit, picking up a small container of sliced watermelon. The vendor, a kind-faced older woman, greeted Ebony warmly. They exchanged pleasantries, Ebony paid, and she took a single step away from the stand when she heard the distinctive sound of a police siren chirp, an attention-grabbing beep meant to warn a pedestrian or driver. Turning her head slowly, Ebony noticed the police cruiser had inched closer. The officer inside, his face partially obscured behind sunglasses, was staring directly at her. He said something through the cruiser's speaker, though it was garbled by the buzz of the midday crowd. Ebony felt a rush of heat climb her spine. Was he talking to her? She glanced around, confirming that yes, the officer's full attention was on her. Nearby tourists paused too. Ebony's heart rate quickened, not out of fear, but out of simmering annoyance and an uneasy sense of déjà vu. She'd been down this road before, profiled for simply existing in a space where some people thought she didn't belong. The officer beckoned her over with a swift wave of his hand. Ebony drew a steadying breath and walked toward the cruiser. Her mind raced with questions. What possible rationale could he have for stopping her? The officer's vehicle read Metropolitan Police Department, a real institution she respected. However, Ebony had also studied enough internal misconduct cases to recognize that a uniform alone did not guarantee fairness or justice. As she approached, Ebony saw the officer's name tag, Rollins. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with a neatly trimmed mustache and a rigid posture that exuded authority. She tried to keep her tone calm and measured. "Yes, officer?" Ebony asked politely, adjusting the container of watermelon in her hand. Officer Rollins lifted his sunglasses just enough to look her squarely in the eye. His expression was unreadable, but Ebony sensed a tension simmering behind his gaze. "I need to see some ID," he said, the words clipped and businesslike. "May I ask why?" Ebony responded. She kept her voice level, refusing to adopt a tone of subservience. She knew her rights, and she wasn't about to relinquish them. Rollins scowled. "Because I said so. That's why." A hush seemed to fall over the immediate area, as if even the tourists and vendors could feel the tension in the air. Ebony's pulse thudded in her ears. This was not a formal request. It was a demand, steeped in aggression and, from her experience, likely fueled by bias. She couldn't help noticing his sharp, cold stare. The container of watermelon felt suddenly heavy in her hand. She said nothing at first, choosing her words carefully. She saw passers-by slow down, some taking out phones, possibly to record. The last thing Ebony wanted was an unnecessary confrontation, especially in public, but she knew that refusing could escalate the situation. Still, she had every right to ask for an explanation. "Officer, if I've done something wrong, I'd like to know what it is," she said, standing tall. Rollins snorted, leaning out of his window. "I just got a call about suspicious behavior. You match the description. Now hand over your ID." Ebony's mind went into high alert. Suspicious behavior, description. It sounded like the typical excuse used when an officer had no legitimate reason to stop someone, and Ebony Harris was nobody's easy target. The knowledge of her official capacity as a Secret Service agent trembled beneath her composure, not out of fear, but out of frustration. Did she reveal her credentials now and put an end to this, or wait and see if the officer overstepped further? A swirl of anxiety and indignation filled her chest. Standing on that busy street corner, Ebony realized she was at a crossroads, both literal and metaphorical. Her next move could determine not only how this encounter would unfold, but also whether justice would ultimately be served. She decided to remain calm for the moment. Ebony set her container of watermelon down on a nearby curb, freeing her hands in case the situation escalated physically, an unfortunate reality she'd seen too often. She didn't want to appear threatening, yet she wasn't about to submit to unjustified demands either. She had every right to ask the officer for his reasoning or to request a supervisor on the scene if things spiraled out of control. "Officer Rollins," she began in a measured tone, reading his name off his badge. "I'm happy to comply if you can explain what suspicious behavior I'm being accused of." "I was simply buying fruit." Rollins glowered, jaw tight. "This area has seen a spike in pickpocketing recently. You fit the description of one of the suspects. Dark jacket, jeans, acting skittish around vendors. Her eyebrows rose slightly. There are hundreds of people around here wearing jackets and jeans, she said, gesturing to the crowd for emphasis. I'm far from the only one. Rollins shrugged, unapologetic. You can either show me your ID or we can continue this conversation downtown. Ebony felt a surge of anger well up, a reflex against this transparent attempt at intimidation. She noticed a few bystanders edging closer, some with phones held inconspicuously at their sides, possibly recording. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. Ebony recognized that in a flash this could become a viral incident, another viral incident, documenting a racist stop. Is that a threat? Ebony asked softly, refusing to let her voice tremble. Rollins averted his gaze for a moment, only to return it with a flourish of annoyance. Ma'am, I'm not threatening you. I'm doing my job. Now please let me see some identification. She inhaled sharply. He didn't appear armed with any real evidence of wrongdoing. He only had a vague description that conveniently matched countless individuals in the area. Ebony's mind churned through the possibilities. She could show him her civilian ID, or she could pull out her Secret Service badge, but Ebony hesitated. If she revealed her badge at this moment, it might humiliate Officer Rollins, potentially provoking him further, though in many cases it might also diffuse the situation instantly. She struggled with the internal question, does he deserve to know? Does he deserve the easy path out? She took a step back, her posture unflinching. All right, officer, she said, forcing a polite tone. I see how this is going. Just to be clear, I haven't committed any crime. I haven't been told I'm under arrest. You have no probable cause besides some vague description. I know my rights. Rollins snorted again, impatience creasing his brow. You do, huh? Indeed, and part of those rights includes asking for a supervisor. I'd like one on the scene before I hand over any ID. People in the growing crowd began whispering to one another. A few had started recording more openly now. Ebony spotted at least 2 phones aimed in her direction, capturing every detail of this confrontation. She hoped that if the situation turned ugly, video evidence might protect her. Though in her personal experience, even video evidence wasn't always enough. Rollins tapped the side of his cruiser in frustration, clearly not pleased with her request. He briefly looked down at his radio, contemplating. Ebony had seen that look before on officers who didn't expect to be questioned. She braced herself, uncertain whether he'd comply or double down on his intimidation tactics. Finally, he sighed and reached for the radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Rollins, badge number 4628, requesting a supervisor to the corner of Constitution and 7th. Over. The response crackled through the radio, affirming that a supervisor was en route. Ebony exhaled, relieved that at least he wasn't ignoring protocol. For all of Rollins's clear bias, he seemed to remain somewhat tethered to departmental procedure, likely because so many eyes were now watching. With a forced show of courtesy, Ebony picked up her container of watermelon again and stood off to one side. The tension in the air was nearly palpable. A cluster of onlookers had formed a semicircle at a respectful distance, some openly filming. The dryness in Ebony's mouth reminded her of the numerous times she'd read about stops just like this. She never imagined she'd be in one herself, at least not as an adult, and not after she'd become a federal agent. Minutes dragged by. Cars passed, and the hum of city life continued around them. Ebony's mind drifted to earlier times, memories of high school classmates who faced arbitrary frisks on their way home from the gym, the night her cousin was detained for fitting a description, only to be released without so much as an apology. Even her father, a war veteran, once had a gun drawn on him during a routine traffic stop. She remembered the fury in his voice when he recounted that experience. Now, Ebony found herself on the threshold of a similarly charged confrontation. Eventually, a second police cruiser arrived. Out stepped a woman in a crisp uniform, hair neatly pinned, her expression resolute as she surveyed the situation. Her name tag read, Sergeant Kendall. She approached with caution, eyes flicking from Officer Rollins to Ebony and then to the small crowd. "Officer Rollins," she began, her tone professional. "You requested a supervisor?" "Yes, Sergeant," Rollins replied. "I have a situation with a suspicious individual who's refusing to show ID." Sergeant Kendall turned to Ebony, and Ebony offered a polite nod. "Ma'am, could you tell me your name and why you're refusing to show ID?" Ebony took a measured breath, trying to stay composed. "I'm not refusing to show ID. I merely asked why I was stopped, since I was just buying fruit. Officer Rollins said I matched the description of a pickpocket suspect, which is news to me. I asked for a supervisor to explain my rights and the officer's probable cause." Kendall nodded thoughtfully, glancing at Rollins. "Officer, do you have an official bulletin or a suspect description from dispatch that includes the details you stated?" Rollins hesitated. The question seemed to catch him off guard. "Well, the dispatch said, 'A black female in a dark jacket and jeans,'" he finally answered, not meeting his supervisor's gaze directly. Kendall's brow knit. "I see." She turned to Ebony again. "And your name, ma'am?" Before Ebony could reply, Rollins interjected, "She won't say." Ebony almost rolled her eyes, but held her composure. "Officer, I didn't refuse to give my name. My name is Ebony Harris." Kendall nodded again, her expression turning more professional and less accusatory. "Thank you, Ms. Harris. Now, would you mind showing me some form of ID so we can clear this up?" In that moment, Ebony weighed her options again. She could hand over her driver's license, or she could display her Secret Service badge. Her frustration at being profiled surged up anew. This might be a valuable teaching moment, for Rollins, for the bystanders, for anyone watching those phone recordings. Reaching into her blazer's inner pocket, Ebony spoke loudly enough for the nearby onlookers to hear. "Yes, Sergeant, I can, but before I do, I want to make it clear that I was stopped without legitimate cause. I hope this department will investigate that." Without waiting for a reply, Ebony removed her Secret Service badge holder. She flipped it open, revealing both her federal badge and her official credentials, each emblazoned with the unmistakable seal and the words, "United States Secret Service." The shift in energy was instantaneous. A few audible gasps rose from the nearby crowd. Sergeant Kendall's eyes widened slightly in recognition, then quickly darted to Rollins. For a moment, it was as if time froze. Rollins's face paled. Any semblance of confidence he had melted away. He stared, speechless, at the badge that signified not only Ebony's authority, but also the reality that she was far from a random, vulnerable target. Ebony locked eyes with him. A surge of both triumph and sadness coursed through her. She shouldn't have needed a powerful badge to validate her basic rights. Yet here they were, in a standoff that would never have happened if she'd been given the same presumption of innocence some other citizens automatically received. Sergeant Kendall cleared her throat softly. "Agent Harris," she said, voice hitching on the unexpected title, "I'd like to apologize on behalf of the department. This appears to be a misunderstanding." That statement alone tugged at Ebony's composure. She wanted to retort that it was more than a misunderstanding. It was likely a blatant example of racial profiling, but she held her tongue. The cameras were still rolling. "Officer Rollins," Kendall continued, her tone now clipped with a hint of admonishment, "I believe Agent Harris is free to go. I'd like you to escort her safely on her way, or remain here and handle crowd control." Rollins stood frozen, looking like he'd swallowed a lemon. The crowd seemed to sense the tension morph into something else, discomfort, perhaps embarrassment. Ebony, for her part, knew this was far from over. A simple parting was not going to settle the injustice she'd just encountered. Quietly, Ebony placed her badge back inside her blazer. She nodded a polite farewell to Sergeant Kendall, then turned to retrieve her container of watermelon from the curb. As she did so, she caught one last look at Rollins, who seemed to be wrestling with a tumult of shame, anger, and confusion all at once. She left the scene feeling exhausted, her earlier happiness overshadowed by a grim reminder. Some people needed to see power in order to recognize a black woman's humanity. The day might have started like any other, but Ebony knew this confrontation had only just begun, because she wasn't about to let it go. Ebony left Constitution Avenue feeling anger and disbelief roiling in her chest. The sunshine and tourist chatter seemed cruelly oblivious to what had just happened. She'd shown her Secret Service badge to prove she wasn't some random suspect, yet the entire confrontation still left her shaken. Her phone buzzed. A glance at the screen told her it was Agent Thomas Delgado, a fellow Secret Service colleague and one of her closest friends. She answered quietly. "Ebony," Delgado said, sounding urgent, "someone in the office forwarded me a video clip. It's you and that cop, right?" Ebony sighed, already suspecting the footage had gone viral. "Yeah, it's me." "Sit tight. I'll meet you at HQ," he promised. 20 minutes later, she found Delgado waiting outside the Secret Service building. His eyes were filled with concern. Without preamble, he guided her inside, where Deputy Director Barbara Yates had called a quick meeting. Yates sat them down in a private conference room, her gaze firm but empathetic. "Agent Harris," Yates said, "we understand you did nothing wrong. However, the department is going to want answers. Officially, we'll request a formal statement from you." Ebony nodded, still unsettled. "I'll document everything." When she'd finished writing, Delgado quietly looked over her statement. "They can't ignore this," he said, pressing a supportive hand to her shoulder. Just then, Ebony's phone rang again, her mother, likely upset after seeing the viral video. Ebony stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Baby, are you all right?" her mother asked in a shaky voice. "I'm fine, Mama," Ebony reassured her, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "I'm handling it." Her mother exhaled, relief mingling with lingering fear. "I love you." Ebony swallowed hard, forcing a steady tone. "Love you too." Returning to the conference room, Ebony handed her statement to an administrative liaison. Yates reminded her to let the agency's press office handle any media questions, then reassured her, "We stand behind you, Ebony. Racial profiling can't be tolerated, no matter who you are." Delgado walked her out, their footsteps echoing in the quiet corridor. "Want to grab some air?" he asked. They ended up on a nearby bench, sipping cold drinks and sorting through the day's events. Ebony fought a swirl of conflicting emotions, fury, humiliation, a dogged determination to see justice served. "I'm filing a complaint," she stated. "Good," Delgado replied. "We can't let this slide." A few co-workers approached, offering words of support. It felt odd to be comforted by the same colleagues she'd once idolized as paragons of law enforcement. But Ebony recognized now that even within these hallowed agencies, prejudice could still lurk. That night, she lay awake replaying the incident. She remembered the officer's glare, the crowd's uneasy hush, and the boost of pride she felt when she revealed her federal credentials. Yet deep down, she knew that no one should have to rely on a special badge just to be treated with respect. By morning, Ebony was more resolute. She didn't want revenge, she wanted accountability. If her complaint could be a catalyst for real scrutiny of unjust policing, she'd see it through, no matter how uncomfortable or unpredictable the road ahead might be. Early the next morning, Ebony sat in her modest apartment in Capitol Hill, glancing at a growing flurry of social media posts on her phone. The video of her encounter had indeed gone viral. Although the clip was only a few minutes long, it showed enough to make the situation clear. Ebony being stopped for no apparent reason, Officer Rollins demanding ID, and Ebony finally flashing her Secret Service badge, to his utter shock. Reactions poured in from all sides. Some comments expressed outrage at the racial profiling, others praised Ebony's calm demeanor. Then there were the trolls, people accusing her of playing the race card or claiming the video was staged to smear the police. Ebony had anticipated this, but still felt a sting reading the hateful words. She glanced at a supportive comment from a stranger, then set her phone aside, rubbing tired eyes. Before she could gather her thoughts, her phone buzzed. A new message appeared from none other than Sergeant Kendall, the supervisor who arrived on the scene the day before. Ebony frowned slightly, unsure what to expect. The text read, "Good morning, Agent Harris. I was able to secure some dashcam bodycam footage from yesterday. Let me know if you'd like to review it. Also, I'd like to speak with you privately. Please let me know your availability." Ebony raised an eyebrow. She appreciated Kendall's initiative, though she also wondered what angle the sergeant was playing. Regardless, the footage could help. Ebony typed a quick reply, expressing willingness to review the recordings and meet at a neutral location, perhaps a cafe near the police station. Kendall responded almost immediately, suggesting a coffee shop not far from the Metropolitan Police headquarters. By 9:30, Ebony was out the door, her black blazer a deliberate choice. It projected professionalism and seriousness. She arrived at the cafe, scanning the interior until she spotted Kendall at a corner table. The sergeant had already purchased coffee, indicated by 2 steaming cups on the table. Ebony thanked her and took a seat. "Agent Harris," Kendall began with a polite nod. "I'm sorry to intrude on your morning like this." Ebony offered a measured smile. "Not a problem, Sergeant. What can I do for you?" Kendall folded her hands on the table. She looked less guarded than she had the previous day, a trace of anxiety in her eyes. "First, I want to apologize again for what happened. The department has launched an internal review. I'm sure you've already filed or are in the process of filing a formal complaint." "Yes," Ebony confirmed, her voice calm. "Right. Well, I also wanted you to know that Officer Rollins has had several other complaints lodged against him in the past year, mostly from people of color, alleging racially biased policing. Those cases were either dropped due to insufficient evidence or settled quietly. But this time, there's a video." Ebony's lips tightened. She'd suspected as much, that this wasn't Rollins's first incident. Her frustration simmered anew. "I see." Kendall nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "As you might imagine, this is going to be a big deal. You're not just a citizen, you're a federal agent. Our leadership is taking this very seriously." "I appreciate that," Ebony said. "I want to ensure that real accountability happens, not just lip service." "Of course." Kendall reached into her uniform jacket, pulling out a small USB drive. "This is the dashcam footage, though the audio is minimal because the cruiser was parked. We also have about 2 minutes of bodycam footage from the moment Rollins stepped out of the car. I wanted to give you a copy of everything, in the interest of transparency." Ebony accepted the USB, feeling equal parts gratitude and skepticism. "Thank you, Sergeant. But why are you doing this?" Kendall paused, looking down at her coffee cup. "I grew up in a mixed-race household," she admitted softly. "My father is black, my mother is white. I joined the force believing I could be a bridge, help change the culture from within. But sometimes it's tough. And seeing what happened with you, someone who's dedicated to public service just like me, it was a wake-up call. I want to do the right thing, even if that means stepping on some toes in my department." Ebony studied Kendall, weighing her sincerity. The sergeant's eyes were filled with an earnestness that Ebony found hard to discount. She nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty. If we're going to fix this, we need people on the inside willing to stand up." Kendall managed a small smile. "Exactly. Now I have to warn you, not everyone at the precinct is as supportive. Some are circling the wagons, claiming you were being combative or uncooperative, the typical spin." Ebony snorted softly. "I expected as much. Fortunately, the video evidence will show the truth." "It will," Kendall agreed. "But be prepared for a battle in the court of public opinion, especially online, and watch your back. Rollins is the kind of officer who might seek retaliation." "I'm not afraid of him," Ebony stated plainly. Kendall studied her. "I didn't expect you to be." They talked a while longer, discussing possible next steps. Ebony made it clear she intended to file a formal complaint through the appropriate channels and likely speak with an attorney to ensure her rights were protected. Kendall offered to vouch for her version of events, if necessary. When they parted ways, Ebony felt an odd mix of relief and trepidation. She was grateful Kendall seemed determined to do the right thing, but the mention of potential retaliation made her uneasy. She headed back to her apartment to review the footage on her laptop. The dashcam video opened with a standard view of the street in front of the police cruiser. Though grainy, Ebony could see her figure approaching the fruit vendor. Next came the body cam footage, capturing the moment Rollins stepped out of his cruiser and confronted her, his tone already harsh, the inherent bias practically echoing in his clipped commands. Ebony's sense of indignation flared anew. There was no justification for his demeanor. He hadn't witnessed any suspicious act, nor had the dispatch call singled her out beyond a vague description that could apply to hundreds of people. She watched herself in the video, standing calm, requesting a supervisor, eventually revealing her badge. The most startling part was Rollins's expression the instant he realized she was Secret Service. Even from the limited vantage point of the body cam, Ebony could read the shock and guilt washing over his features. By the time she finished reviewing the recordings, Ebony felt more determined than ever. No one watching that footage could deny the profiling at play. She forwarded a copy to Delgado, who responded almost immediately with a text. "We've got him. Let's see them try to weasel out of this one." Yet Ebony knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The wheels of accountability turned slowly, and sometimes those in power did everything they could to resist, deflect, or bury the truth. But she was not alone. She had the backing of her agency, allies within the police department like Kendall, and thousands of strangers who'd shared and commented on the viral video, demanding justice. Still, Ebony couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of her mind, reminding her that real change was a process. Officer Rollins might face consequences, but what about the deeper systemic issues that enabled people like him to act with impunity in the first place? Ebony's story might be a catalyst, but it wouldn't be the end of the struggle. Rolling her shoulders to release tension, she closed her laptop. She had enough proof to move forward, and the support to do so effectively. Whatever came next, however intense the scrutiny or pushback, Ebony would stand her ground. She'd do it for herself, for her father, for her community, and for all those who believed in true justice. Within days, Ebony's complaint set off a chain reaction. Local news outlets picked up the viral video, and she found herself at the center of heated debate. Some hailed her courage, while others accused her of stirring controversy. The Secret Service, wary of media frenzy, urged Ebony to keep a low profile until the departmental investigation ran its course. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, placed Officer Rollins on desk duty, pending the outcome. Community activists called for his termination, pointing to a string of past complaints. Despite the storm, Ebony returned to her protective duties. She noticed subtle shifts. Some co-workers offered quiet support, while others seemed uneasy, as though her case might unearth bigger issues within law enforcement. Through it all, her closest ally remained Agent Thomas Delgado, who updated her on grassroots protests planned outside MPD headquarters. Several organizers even reached out, hoping Ebony would speak. She declined, following agency guidance to avoid jeopardizing the inquiry. A few days later, Ebony attended a meeting at Secret Service headquarters. Deputy Director Yates and Lieutenant Beckham from MPD's Internal Affairs briefed her on the investigation's progress. Rollins claimed he had cause to stop her and that she was uncooperative, but the video and Sergeant Kendall's account contradicted him. Beckham said a range of punishments, from suspension to termination, remained on the table. Feeling both relief and lingering anxiety, Ebony stepped out of the building with Yates by her side. Yates cautioned her that Rollins might appeal any disciplinary measures and warned that some within MPD resented the public backlash. "Stay vigilant," Yates said, "but know the evidence is on your side." Back home, Ebony let the day's wait sink in. Though progress was being made, she knew real justice wasn't always swift. She thought of her father's words. Wearing a badge couldn't protect her from prejudice. Her phone buzzed constantly with news updates and social media alerts, including activists rallying under "Aunt Justice" for Ebony. Yet underneath her exhaustion, Ebony felt a growing resolve. She would see this through, fighting for accountability not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been profiled without the benefit of a federal shield. The wheels of justice were turning, and Ebony intended to keep them in motion. 2 days later, Ebony sat in her office at the Secret Service building, catching up on paperwork. A gentle knock on the doorframe made her look up to see Delgado. "Ebony," he said quietly, stepping inside. "There's someone here to see you." She arched an eyebrow. "Who?" "Officer Rollins." Delgado's voice carried a note of surprise. "He showed his badge at the front desk, said he needs to speak to you. Yates authorized him to come up, but I told him he'd better keep it civil." Ebony's heart hammered in her chest. The last thing she expected was a face-to-face meeting with the man who'd profiled her. A kaleidoscope of emotions spun through her mind: anger, curiosity, apprehension. Delgado held her gaze. "I can send him away if you're not comfortable." Ebony swallowed, considering. "No, let him in, but stay nearby." "Got it." Delgado gave a supportive nod before stepping out. Moments later, Officer Derek Rollins appeared in the doorway. He looked decidedly less self-assured than he had on the street. Dressed in plain clothes, dark slacks and a collared shirt, he clutched his badge in one hand, almost like a talisman. Ebony stood, arms folded over her chest, refusing to cede her composure. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone even but cold. Rollins stepped into the office, glancing around at the understated decor. Framed commendations, a photo of Ebony receiving an award for her service. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to apologize." Ebony's eyebrows lifted. Of all the possibilities she'd envisioned, a personal apology wasn't high on the list. "Apologize?" she echoed, her voice laced with skepticism. He nodded, looking momentarily uncomfortable. "Yeah, for that day, for how I treated you. I was in the wrong." Ebony stared at him, her thoughts swirling with doubt. Was this an attempt to salvage his career, or was it genuine remorse? "Why now?" she finally asked. "The department's internal review is almost done. You had plenty of time to reflect before this." Rollins shifted on his feet, gaze dropping to the floor. "Look, I know I messed up. I didn't expect this to blow up the way it did. But that's not the point. The point is, I acted on assumptions, bad ones, and when I realized who you were, I got scared. Fear turned into anger." He blew out a breath. "My life's been complicated lately." Ebony's jaw tightened. "So you took it out on me? You realize that day could have gone a lot worse for me if I hadn't been who I am?" Rollins nodded, eyes clouded with remorse. "I know, and that's the part that's eating me up. I've been a cop for 15 years. I've seen a lot of crime. My default is to suspect people, especially if they stand out. That's not an excuse. It's just the mindset I got stuck in." Ebony let the words sink in. The tension in the room felt suffocating. Part of her wanted to lash out, to condemn him, to tell him one apology wasn't enough to undo the harm he had caused, not just to her, but presumably to many others who lacked her credentials or connections. Another part of her recognized the sheer rarity of this moment, a police officer admitting he was wrong. She spoke slowly, deliberately. "I appreciate the apology, but you should know, I'm not withdrawing my complaint." Rollins nodded again. "I figured, and I don't blame you. Honestly, I'm not here to ask you to drop it. I just needed you to know I'm sorry. The investigation will do what it does. I might get fired. Probably deserve it." Ebony inhaled, feeling her pulse in her throat. She peered closely at Rollins, trying to gauge whether he was truly sincere or simply desperate. In the silence that followed, she recalled her father's own encounter with an officer who never apologized, never admitted fault, leaving scars that never fully healed. "Why me?" Ebony asked, her voice trembling slightly with residual anger. Why'd you pick me out of the crowd? He offered a small, rueful smile, though it looked more like a grimace. Because you're a black woman. Because I was on edge from some earlier calls. Because I'd had complaints filed against me before, and I was convinced everyone was out to get me. So I got defensive, assumed the worst. That's the truth. She blinked, the honesty hitting her like a punch. You know how messed up that is, right? Rollins nodded, tears glimmering in his eyes. I know. That's why I'm here. I can't change the past, but I'm trying to face it. Ebony glanced at the door, suddenly wishing Delgado was still in sight. Dealing with Rollins's raw confession unobserved felt both intense and strangely disarming. She cleared her throat, searching for her composure. You realize the damage you've done, beyond just me? The mistrust you create when you treat innocent people like criminals just because of how they look? Rollins's eyes dropped again. I'm aware. And if I stay on the force, if that's even possible, I need to do better. If I don't, well, I still need to do better as a human being. For a long moment, neither spoke. Ebony's heart thudded in her chest as she fought to maintain an appearance of calm. Finally she broke the silence, her voice quiet but resolute. I'm not going to tell you everything's forgiven just because you're apologizing. This is bigger than the two of us. People get hurt, killed by these assumptions every day. Maybe you can atone in some way, maybe not. Either way, I'm not stopping the investigation. Rollins nodded, swallowing visibly. I respect that, and I want you to know, no matter what happens with the department, I won't contest it. She believed him, though grudgingly. All right. He turned to go, then paused at the door, looking over his shoulder. Thank you for hearing me out. I know you didn't have to. Ebony said nothing. She stared at him, arms still crossed, face unreadable. After a few seconds, he walked away, footsteps echoing down the hall. When he was gone, Ebony sank into her chair, feeling like she'd run a marathon. Delgado hurried in, eyes wide with concern. You good? I was about to come in if he tried anything. Ebony looked up, her gaze distant. He apologized. Delgado's eyebrows shot up. Seriously? Yeah. She exhaled shakily, rubbing her temples. Said he was wrong, that he's sorry, that he might get fired and deserves it. Delgado leaned against the doorframe, a stunned look on his face. Wow, didn't see that coming. Ebony nodded. Me either. For the next few minutes they processed the conversation. Delgado offered comforting words, reminding Ebony that even heartfelt apologies don't automatically rectify systemic issues. Ebony agreed, but also admitted that a small part of her felt some closure in hearing Rollins own up to his actions. She recognized that not every officer who crossed the line would do the same. Still, Ebony's complaint stood, and the MPD's internal process was ongoing. Whatever personal realizations Rollins had come to, the institutional accountability must follow. Even if Ebony's case resulted in actual consequences for him, the deeper task of overhauling biases within policing would remain. She could only hope her story pushed that dial a fraction closer toward justice. When she finally left the office that evening, Ebony felt a curious blend of exhaustion and resolution. Rollins's apology might have come from a genuine place, or maybe it was an 11th-hour bid for redemption. Either way, Ebony knew her role in the matter wasn't finished. She was determined to see things through, because real change demanded persistence, and Ebony Harris was nothing if not persistent. The next several weeks brought a roller coaster of developments. The internal investigation concluded, recommending Rollins's termination. An independent review board upheld the recommendation, citing not only Ebony's case, but multiple prior complaints, where Rollins's actions were, at best, questionable. When the MPD chief publicly announced that Officer Derek Rollins would be let go, an uproar ensued across media outlets and social platforms. Some of Rollins's supporters decried the decision as overkill, arguing he shouldn't lose his job over one stop, especially since Ebony wasn't physically harmed. However, a louder chorus pointed to the many documented instances of racial bias and abuse of authority. Community leaders stated that one high-profile firing wouldn't solve everything, but it was a sign that such behavior carried real consequences. For Ebony, the news arrived in an official memo from MPD Internal Affairs, delivered to her desk at the Secret Service. She read it in silence. Officer Derek Rollins has been found in violation of departmental policy. Racial bias complaints were substantiated. The disciplinary board has determined that termination is warranted. She let the words sink in. A sensation like relief, tinged with a sobering awareness, washed over her. A few days later, Ebony received a call from Sergeant Kendall. The sergeant's tone brimmed with both relief and a touch of sadness. "Well, it's done," Kendall said. "Rollins is no longer with us. Some people at the station are furious, but a lot of the younger officers are saying it's about time." "I appreciate the update," Ebony replied. "Thank you for stepping up when you didn't have to." Kendall paused. "We all have to. That's the only way this changes. Best of luck, Agent Harris." When Ebony hung up, she gazed out her office window at the steady flow of traffic and pedestrians on the street below. She thought about how the world would continue on, day by day, with or without accountability. For once, though, accountability had arrived. She felt a measure of satisfaction, but not triumph. It wasn't a victory in a conventional sense, just a necessary correction of an injustice. That evening, Ebony found herself in her father's living room, a cozy space filled with military memorabilia and old family photographs. Her father, Henry Harris, wore reading glasses perched on his nose and held a battered photo album. Inside were snapshots of Ebony's childhood, pictures of him in his Marine uniform, and Ebony's graduation from the Secret Service Training Academy. He glanced up as she recounted the final outcome. "So they fired him," he said quietly, flipping a page in the album. A younger Ebony beamed up from a photograph with braided pigtails. "That's something." She nodded. "It is." Her father removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I had officers pull me over for no reason when I was your age. None of them ever faced consequences, let alone got fired. This is a new world. I'm proud of you." Ebony felt her chest tighten with emotion. She slid closer on the couch, resting her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I feel guilty. Like, because I had the badge, my case got attention. What about all the people who don't?" Henry sighed. "You can't carry the weight of the whole world, Ebony. You did what you had to do. Maybe this sends a message that can help others." She nodded against his shoulder, blinking back tears. Her father set aside the album, gently wrapping an arm around her. They sat like that for a while, the quiet hum of the house enveloping them. In the weeks that followed, Ebony continued her duties with the Secret Service. She protected visiting diplomats and public officials, traveled occasionally outside the district, and tried to find moments of normalcy in her day-to-day life. The public fervor around her case eventually cooled, replaced by the next big headline. But Ebony's personal resolve only deepened. She stayed in touch with Sergeant Kendall, discussing ways the MPD could improve community relations. They talked about training programs, mentorship initiatives, and policy reforms, steps that might prevent future Officer Rollinses from operating unchecked. Kendall hinted she was lobbying higher-ups to bring Ebony in for a talk about unconscious bias training, though Ebony politely declined for the time being, wary of crossing professional boundaries. Still, the seeds were planted. A month later, Ebony attended a small community forum at a local church in D.C. She wasn't there in an official capacity, simply as Ebony Harris, a concerned citizen. The event drew a modest crowd, some activists, neighborhood residents, a few plainclothes cops who wanted to learn how to build better relationships with the public. Ebony slipped into a seat near the back, listening to panelists discuss police reform, accountability, and the ripple effects of high-profile incidents like Ebony's. Toward the end, the moderator, a middle-aged pastor, asked if anyone in the audience wanted to share. Ebony felt her pulse quicken, but she stood anyway. "Hi," she began, voice trembling slightly. "My name is Ebony Harris. You might have heard about my case. The MPD officer who was fired. I just want to say I'm grateful that justice was served in that instance. But I also know that isn't the end of the fight. We have to keep pushing for systemic changes, training, oversight, cultural shifts, so that no one else has to rely on a fancy badge to prove they're worthy of respect." A quiet hush fell over the room, followed by gentle applause. Ebony's cheeks warmed. She offered a nod of gratitude to the moderator and took her seat again, heartbeat thrumming. Afterward, several attendees approached her, sharing personal stories or simply thanking her for speaking up. One woman said her teenage son had been stopped by the police repeatedly for looking suspicious. Another man, himself an officer, expressed admiration for Ebony's courage, admitting he'd grown disillusioned by some of his colleagues' behavior. It dawned on Ebony that, intentionally or not, she had become a symbol of accountability, and that maybe her willingness to stand firm had chipped away at the status quo, at least a little. Much later that night, Ebony returned to her apartment and stood on her small balcony, gazing over the lights of the city she still loved. Despite its flaws, DC remained a place of hope and possibility in her eyes. She took a moment to reflect on how quickly life could change, how a seemingly ordinary day could explode into a media storm, a departmental review, and a career-ending consequence for an officer with a history of misconduct. She breathed in the cool night air, her mind settling on one thought. Karma had come for Rollins, swift and unyielding, yet Ebony knew that real victory lay not in one man's downfall, but in the incremental steps toward a fairer, more equitable system. And while she might not be able to fix it all in her lifetime, she had planted her flag, drawn a line, and said, "No more." That, in its own quiet way, felt like the most significant victory of all. And that, dear friends, is the story of how a simple act of racial profiling spiraled into a turning point. An officer who abused his authority, brought to his knees by a badge he never saw coming. It's a reminder that justice isn't always swift, but it can be powerful when enough people insist on truth. Ebony Harris stood her ground, refusing to let prejudice define her worth. In doing so, she became a catalyst for change, showing that even a single voice raised against injustice can echo far beyond one individual incident. If this story moved you, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep the conversation going about equality, accountability, and the power of standing up for what's right. Every share amplifies this message. Every subscription supports more stories that bring to light the struggles and triumphs of everyday heroes. Join us, and together, let's spark a brighter future.